Welcome to Age Hackers, powered by Gladden Longevity with Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, where our passion is to help you live young for a lifetime. On this show, we want to help you optimize your longevity, health, and human performance with impactful and actionable information by answering three questions. How good can we be? How do we make 100 the new 30? And how do we live well beyond 120? I'm Steve Reiter, and Dr. Gladden, we just got done with Rowena Gates. She's with Eng3 Corporation, and they have a product that I've heard of for years now, NanoVi. And I actually got to test it out at Upgrade Labs in Santa Monica when I was out in Southern California in December. And because I was stacking so many different things during that time that I was there, I didn't really know exactly how much benefit I got from it. But you have a NanoVi device yourself, and you love it.
Yeah, no, I do. I met Rowena a while ago, and this is just so the audience knows, we're not talking about a supplement here. We're actually talking about a medical device that you use, and you're going to learn more about it in this show. I think it's a game changer, quite honestly. I think particularly when you combine it with some stuff that we're going to talk about here, you're going to see some new insights, and you're going to get some new insights into cellular function that you probably are not aware of that are super interesting and very exciting. So I love doing this show with Rowena.
Yeah, it was great. And for listeners that are interested and they listen and they like it, we talk about a page has been set up on eng3corp.com. That's ENG, the number 3, corp.com/Gladden. And if you register there or you call and you mention the podcast, you get a free travel case. And you have the travel case, and you say it's really well built and designed.
Yeah. No, it's incredibly well built. I mean, you could throw this thing off of a 5-story building and you probably wouldn't break the thing inside. I mean, it's that well constructed. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Welcome everybody to this edition of the Age Hackers podcast, powered by Gladden Longevity. I'm your host, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden. I'm here with my co-host and friend, Steve Reiter. Steve, what's going on with you today?
It's a beautiful sunny morning here in Colorado, although afternoon rain and thunderstorms are supposed to be moving in. So I was able to get out and get a nice morning walk in the sun and get my morning sunshine.
Yeah, beautiful. Love it. I made it back to the island yesterday, so I had some sunshine here too. So that was fun. Well, we've got a really interesting show. I met Rowena Gates, who's going to be our guest today. I don't know, several years ago, and then at least a year ago, and we've had numerous conversations over time. But she's involved with a medical device that we've become sort of fascinated and enamored with at the same time. And I'm really glad to have her on a show to speak to us today about it. So, Rowena, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So her device basically is called NanoVi. And Rowena, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background, how you kind of got into this whole area and what brought you to even get involved in the first place?
I sort of backed into it. I'm a high-tech internet-based e-commerce entrepreneur.
Okay.
First company in 1995, which was pretty early for
that is pretty early
business to business on the internet. And I'd been through a couple of companies by then, co-founded one. I just a company had been sold, and I stayed as CEO for a couple of years, and I was going to take a break. Mm-hmm. And I said I would help with my partner Hans Eng with what's now become NanoVi and the company Eng3. And he's a German engineer, and his English wasn't great. So I thought initially that would be my thing, would be the English. Okay. But very quickly I became really involved with it. And then there was essentially this discovery of a new technology that we then formed NanoVi around.
Okay.
And so
let me just get this straight. So he's a German engineer who was working in the space where NanoVi works. And I know the audience still doesn't know what we're talking about. We're going to reveal that here in a minute. But he was working in a space that was leading up to NanoVi. Is that correct?
Yeah, he had come out to the U.S. from Berlin and was bringing some some German technologies into the US. So he'd done a few different technologies, and he was doing that when I met him. And it was hard because his English it's good now,
Sure.
but that was 20 years ago or something. It was, there was a lot of work to be done, basically. And
What technologies was he working with, or what categories?
there was one related to HRV,
Okay.
and a couple of other devices that were sort of what they called singlet oxygen.
Okay.
And so there were a few areas where he was working, and I started out helping um, in with him before NanoVi, but in about 2007. It became clear that the technology was available to build a NanoVi and to do things in a way that could influence the water in the cells
All
without.
right. So let's spill the beans for the audience here. So what does NanoVi do? Let's tell them that, and then we can talk about a little bit how they do it, and then some of the data around it all. But what does NanoVi do actually?
Sure. It's the whole point of it is to improve the environment in the cells, which is water, for the cellular activities, primarily proteins and protein folding. And
Mm-hmm.
so what it does is it modifies a humid airflow by bombarding it with specific wavelengths that can be absorbed by water. In
These
that
are
case,
wavelengths of light, actually, and there's two of them, as I recall.
yeah, but they're well above visible light, for example.
Mhm, mhm,
And so because the water droplets can absorb them, it'll change the energy state of those droplets,
mhm.
so that when they're delivered through the mucous membrane to the person, the that energy state is transferred throughout the cellular water. So it's transferred across the water molecules,
Right.
rather than being diffused or something,
So
or moved
this
through the blood.
so this is pretty fascinating. So we've seen technologies where they're energy based, right? And we know that we can, for example, we can signal cells with energy that's been imprinted into water, say like the NES Health products, or there are other people out there that are now imprinting information like we are into hydrogen tablets that can then provide information. But what you're talking about here is actually a little bit different. Not really, it's just a variation on a theme, so to speak, because you're putting energy into water, but then you're actually utilizing that water to help structure or organize the water inside the cell in a way that potentiates optimal function of proteins and protein synthesis, protein folding, things like that within the cell. Did I get that right?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
So it's a pretty fascinating thing. And why would we need this? Why does anybody need this? Why doesn't it just happen on its own?
It does happen on its own. And
Okay.
we mimic the body, because I know that, like your all the signaling and so on, but the body naturally emits a specific wavelength,
Hmm.
and that alters the energy state of the water in the cells. We mimicked that wavelength, and it's up around 1200 nanometers, just so you know.
Okay.
So that was known. All of that is cell biology, all known prior to us.
Right.
Our innovation was to take that wavelength, bombard the water droplets with it, and deliver it through the humid airflow.
So here's something for the audience to digest. When we think about cells, we we can think about cells as being structures, right? Right. The analogy is a house. It has different rooms, different furniture in the rooms, different functions take place in those things. So we can think about a cell from a structural level. Then we can think about a cell from a biochemical level, where there's molecules and signaling and hormones and paracrine effects and endocrine effects and all these different kinds of chemically mediated effects in the cell that the cell is receiving and sensing and also transmitting. But then really a more complete picture of the cell is to understand that it has structures and it has chemicals, but it also has a whole energetic to it, right? Which is made up of electrical gradients. And it's also made up of, so there's electromagnetic energy in the cell, but there's also energy in the cell, sort of life energy in the cell to some extent. And we emit energy like, you can sort of see somebody's energy when they come into the room. That's kind of psychological, but you can also feel it when somebody else is in the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not just the heat, the infrared energy coming off the body, which is one form of energy coming out, but there's also other energy. You can sort of gauge somebody's mood, how they're feeling, and these other things. And so we talk about five senses, but I really think we have six. And the sixth one is our ability to read energy, if you will, sense it and read it and interpret it. And the body is no different. It's doing that constantly. So when you're thinking about optimizing cellular function, yes, optimizing structure is important. And we know that loss of structure is part of the hallmarks of aging. Optimizing biochemical signaling is important because we know that's related to the hallmarks of aging. But now also optimizing the energetics of the cell, right? Which is another area that many people are pushing into, but many people listening to this may not realize that this is as important or maybe the ultimate common denominator of these other areas that we're so used to thinking about when we think about cells and cell function. So I just want to set the stage that what we're talking about here is not oh, wow, what a weird peripheral. I could never possibly make use of that. No, I start to see this as actually being more of a central element of cellular optimization, if you will. So pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And I think it's been recognized more, especially in Germany and Russia, where
Yeah,
they're ahead of us with those technologies
that's
because
right.
they've been paying. It's not so unusual for them as it is. And if you look back at the history, a lot of them come from those two
That's right.
areas of the world.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Mhm.
Um, so you're working with the Germans, but not the Russians. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, you know what? We were working with the Russians until the war in the Ukraine because
Okay. Yeah.
they're way ahead of the game. And I don't know if you know
Really?
Gerald Pollack, but he's here in Seattle and he's water science, and he
Mhm.
introduced us to a group in Russia, which is an ideal research group for us.
Okay.
And we've had some big work underway that's on pause because
Sure. Yeah.
we can't transfer the
Putin got
money and they
excited.
can't work.
Yeah. Putin got excited and started doing silly things. So
Yeah.
unfortunately. So let's talk a little bit about the device so people can get a picture of this. What are we actually talking about? What does it look like? How do you use it? All that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
So it's about a foot square sitting on a desk, and on top of that, it has a bubbling water jar
Hmm.
that is creating the humidity. And then that goes through a long, sort of flexible tubing that you can either inhale directly from the tube, or you can put a cannula on the end of it and breathe it from a cannula, which is what all medical offices, all centers typically do, that because someone could turn their head if they're only using
Right.
the tube. We call that a flex arm, but it's this flexible arm that comes out of the device.
Right.
And so it's easy to administer, and then the interface is super easy, like using the remote control on your TV or something. Well,
Yeah.
that's hard. Never mind. Forget I
It pretty
said
much
that.
has one button. It pretty much has one button. You push it on,
Yeah,
it sets itself, you hit start, and off you go, right? So,
right.
yeah.
Uh,
And cannula, just so people understand that, if you've ever seen somebody sitting in a medical hospital bed or an ICU bed, and they have those little prongs in their nose that are delivering oxygen, let's say, or something else, that's what we're talking about. They're
Yeah,
little, so it's being delivered right into your nostrils.
yeah. And
Yeah,
people often confuse it with concentrated oxygen, and it does improve oxygen utilization. So if somebody's low, you can measure that on
Really?
an oximeter. You can see the blood
Really?
turns from brown to red,
mm-hmm,
but we're not adding oxygen. And
mm-hmm.
so it actually, that's a cellular function, of course. And so if you improve it, it's going to
So
improve.
So I've been using it now for probably 9 months or so. I'm going to say something like that, maybe 10 months. And I've been playing with it because I play with everything. Uh, And I found that it's actually very helpful for recovery. Like if I go for a run or I go for a mountain bike or I, go out in the ocean or do something and I come back and I'm fatigued, I find that when I sit there and inhale it for 15 minutes, that it starts to really bring me back. I feel like I recover kind of more quickly, if you will. I don't know if that's something that you've noticed with it. Uh,
Um, Absolutely, and that's been the improved speed of the kind of immune response has been showed in a double-blind placebo-controlled crossover study. So
So tell me about that. So the improved response of the immune system. So what are we saying? Somebody has a weakened immune system and you strengthen it, or the immune system's been challenged, or let's say if you go for a run and your immune system's weak from the exercise you just did, it comes back sooner, or what was it? What are we saying?
it's the last of those. The study
Okay,
was done on athletes because you can overstress them and see what
right.
happens.
Yeah.
And then they used just markers for immune response, blood
Hmm.
components, and measured the difference in the study. And it was depending on which marker they're looking for, it was a range between 10 and 17%
Okay.
improvement. So they're just kicking in faster for faster recovery. But it's also something that trained athletes always notice. Some of us might not notice it so much if we're not so well, tuned into it and kind
Yeah.
of aware.
Right. Yeah, I've noticed it there, and I've also noticed it with let's say fatigue that might come about during the day. So let's say your brain's been on, you're going back to back to back to back to back kind of thing on calls or whatever. And I've found that molecular hydrogen is actually incredibly helpful in that regard. But I've also found that that the NanoVi has a rejuvenating element to it as well that I feel. So is that something that you've
Yeah.
described?
I think that's like one of the best combinations because molecular hydrogen is a very effective scavenger of free radicals. So
Mm-hmm.
it plays that role in as an antioxidant. First of all, if you're concentrating, you're burning energy just like you are if you're out for a run. I mean,
That's right.
you therefore have the potential for oxidative stress going on,
That's
just
right.
like you would. And so the molecular hydrogen helps to scavenge the free radicals. NanoVi helps to repair the damage that's already done because
Okay.
proteins are what's going to fix any damage, and we support the proteins. And so if you combine them,
Hmm.
that's really smart.
Okay. Well, that's what I found to be probably the most effective way to use both those things, actually. So that's interesting. This is what happens when you play with stuff. You just kind of stumble into these things, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I like playing with stuff. So tell us a little bit more about the NanoVi, though, because I'm really curious. Before we started the podcast, we started talking a little bit about the original research, and there was a paper that's listed on your website. I had to kind of dig through the website a little bit to get to it, but then I downloaded it and read it. And it had to do with the fact that this energized water had the ability to go inside the cell and help partition water, if you will. And just so the listeners understand, we tend to think of water as just this ubiquitous soup, but it's not. Inside the cell, water is actually divided into different segments almost, right? So up against the membrane and free here and close to this there, and it has different energetics and different kind of alignments, different structures, even kind of within the cell. And so the paper that I read was suggesting that the NanoVi was actually improving the structure of water in the cell, which was then facilitating this enhancement in protein folding and protein function. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, or
Yeah,
am I close?
sure. So the state of the water, you're talking about these differences, and I think just as an aside, water is absolutely fascinating. We've just starting to explore it, and
Mhm.
all the information that can be stored, all of that. But what we know is that there's water that's called the fourth phase of water. It's not a solid, liquid, or gas. It's more
Mhm.
like a gel, and that's critical in the cells. It's that gel state that forms only on surfaces. It doesn't, you can't have a glass of this
Right.
ordered water. We call it ordered water. It's also called exclusion zone water or EZ
That's right.
water.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because the molecules are so closely pressed together that it pushes anything else out. So it excludes all other substances, and they call it exclusion zone. And that forms on every surface in the cell. In our case, we care a lot about the proteins because it is that gel state of water that donates the energy to the chain of amino acid that makes up the peptide or protein and enables it to fold. And so people understand that this long string of amino acids has to get into a very complicated three-dimensional shape in order to function. And that 3D shape also determines what its function is. And so that's why there's so much emphasis on predicting folded proteins, because
That's right.
then medicines can intervene in all kinds of ways. But anyway, that is in fact a transfer of entropy. It's not energy like heat.
That's right.
Things we think of it's an entropy change. So
just so the audience understands what we're talking about here, right? So an entropy transfer, right? So entropy is one of the fundamental laws of physics. Which one is it? The third law?
Thermodynamics.
The third law of thermodynamics, right? Second law, second law. I think it's the second law of thermodynamics. Yeah. But entropy, that everything is always moving. Ultimately, in aggregate, everything is moving towards increasing entropy, which is increasing randomness, if you will, less organization. So when you have this fourth phase of water, this structured water in this gel phase, it actually has structure, so it's decreased entropy inside of it, right? So then the unstructured protein will be transferring its entropy into the water. I'm hypothesizing now. You're going to correct me. And the gel is absorbing that and taking on that entropy, so that the protein can actually become more structured and actually fold itself into the form in which it needs to be able to work, so to speak.
That's exactly it. And then the water becomes more chaotic or random, and
right?
Then it gets recharged. And so this is an ongoing process.
Right. So when you're using the NanoVi, it's almost like you're recharging. You're actually taking entropy out of the cell to enable things that are in a random state in the cell to become more organized and give them a place to dump their randomness, right? So
I'm going to quote you on that. I'll get a transcript of this. That was good.
So that's kind of what's happening here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
Exactly.
Go ahead. So, well, let me ask you this. So if that's what's happening, then I can see how this would facilitate more optimal cell function, right? Because you're enabling the cell to organize and structure itself better, because now it has a place to dump its randomness off into, a sort of a sink to dump it off into. And then you recharge the sink so that it can receive more of that randomness, which leads to more structure and function in the cell. What kind of studies have you done to kind of show the actual benefits or whatever of actually doing this? I know that you've got some research going on. So can you talk us through that?
Well, on that part inside the cell like that, we're relying on the research done in cell biology.
Okay.
So there's a pretty big area of that. So essentially we're kind of leveraging that and then just augmenting what the body's already doing. So they know, and they determined many years ago that the only place for proteins to get the energy they needed to fold was from the water. Because if people don't know, every cell is largely water. Something like 99% of the molecules in the body are water, and every protein is immersed in water. So that's the environment. And so then our approach is just to improve the overall environment and let the body do whatever it knows to do.
Right.
So we're not adding any substances, which you can do with things like peptides, which is a really interesting, by the way, you had a very interesting podcast on that.
Yeah.
But
with Dr. Seeds.
Interesting combination with NanoVi. It's like do
Oh, wow.
both, put the peptides in there and then also amp them up, basically.
Nice. Oh, I love that. We'll start doing that in the office.
This episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast is brought to you by H2 Molecular Hydrogen in the Gladden Longevity Store.
Yeah, Steve, you've heard us talk about this numerous times on the podcast in terms of the benefits of H2 and hydrogen water. We love it. It's really the best way to balance your entire redox system. So it really protects you from free radical damage. I take it every time I get on a flight to protect me from radiation damage when I'm flying. And I use it to rejuvenate my brain in the afternoon. There's really two kinds of exercise. There's physical exercise, and taking H2 before or after that works great. But also there's mental exercise. And I find that the H2 will bring your brain back when you're tired in the afternoon. So I think it's like the perfect thing for longevity and for performance, quite honestly.
And I talked to you about this, that I found dropping 1 or 2 tablets in a glass of water right before bed. I've seen an overall bump in my deep sleep when I do so. And
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you click on the store tab when you visit GladdenLongevityShop.com and use the promo code podcast10, you'll get 10% off your order. And this code isn't only good for our H2 product, but it's also good for all the supplements we carry. So podcast10 at the GladdenLongevityShop.com.
Yeah, one of the other things that I use it for routinely is when I'm about to go on a mountain bike ride. And I will say this, that if I go on a long mountain bike ride, I will take one prior, I'll take one during, and I'll take one after. And some of the Ironmen that we've worked with have said that when they're doing an Ironman, they'll take it 3 or 4 times throughout the race. And their comment is that it's like taking out the old battery and putting in a new one. It really rejuvenates your body's ability to perform when you're doing more extended athletic activity. So think about that too. If you want to go do a longer hike or whatever else, take it with you.
So GladdenLongevityShop.com, enter podcast 10 for 10% off your order.
H2 molecular hydrogen. It's low-hanging fruit on your quest to make 100 the new 30. When we think about the aging process, we think about proteins being transcribed, somewhat inappropriately. There may be DNA modifications that have occurred. There may be issues with autophagy where proteins are not being cleared out of the cells appropriately. There could be more misfolded proteins. We know that there can be messenger RNA splicing dysregulation, which basically means that when a protein is coded for, the pieces of the protein that need to be cut out in order for the protein to be formulated into its final form may not happen appropriately. So we've got a lot of things that affect proteins as we go through the aging process. Is this partitioning of water, does this help with regards to aging and on any level? Does it impact all the way upstream, or is it mostly just focused on the protein folding and function no matter what shows up, or does it impact even back to like the DNA in some way?
In every way, up and down the stream, because just kind of as a reference, the DNA, the whole purpose of the DNA is a blueprint for proteins.
Right. That's right.
The DNA is damaged. It's sequestered in the nucleus to reduce damage, but it still gets damaged constantly. Mm-hmm. And again, that has to be repaired. So that in itself is a protein function, and any of that repair all the way up the chain. The more you can repair those or prevent the damage. And by the way, the one study I think you mentioned, it showed not only that NanoVi repaired the damage to proteins, but it also prevented it. And the researchers believe that was because it improves the stability of the protein, so it's less inclined to get damaged in the first place.
Okay.
And so anything you can do to protect them, keep them safer, and certainly not have excess misfolded or unfolded proteins that could accumulate into tangles and plaques and things you definitely don't want in the aging process, then it's a pretty powerful but very fundamental approach to longevity and healthy aging.
Yeah. Have you guys done any, have you had the opportunity, I should say, to do any research to look at whether or not you can decrease the number of misfolded proteins, like in Alzheimer's with tau or beta amyloid or alpha-synuclein in Parkinson's or anything like that?
We haven't looked at those, and one of the reasons is that it's we do not study any diseases. We
Okay.
study what underlies the diseases, so oxidative stress levels, human conditions like even heart rate variability is an indicator, or athletic performance recovery,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And athletes, we have a decent number on athletes, including one of DNA damage, double strand DNA damage.
Yeah.
And that was a small study because it's counting the FOTC they count for looking at double strand breaks is complicated. And it was a small study, but the improvements ranged from 14 to 34% less double strand DNA breaks
Oh, wow.
when the
Yeah.
athletes. It was an Olympic training center that
Wow.
did the study, so they kept everything else the same and looked at the same training regime with or without NanoVi.
Oh, that's fascinating. Now, what was the routine they were using the NanoVi with? Were they doing this prior to workouts, during workouts, after
A-
workouts?
After, only
After.
after.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's fascinating. Because a lot of us love exercise. There are people out there that don't love exercise, right? I won't name names, but there's some very high-profile people that don't like exercise. And for them, it's a check the box kind of category. It's like, well, I do it because I need to check a box. But many of us actually just enjoy it, right? We were talking about, you guys were talking about backpacking and hiking and, all the different things we love to do. And yet we know that there are times when we push ourselves pretty hard and there's a U-shaped curve to exercise. Too little is bad, too much is bad, and there's a sweet spot there, sort of at the bottom of the U, if you will. So it's nice if the NanoVi enables athletes and people that enjoy their athleticism to be able to continue to do that, but not suffer the damage, particularly the DNA damage that might occur relative to that level of exercise, right? That's kind of what we're saying.
Right. And we have so many people that they're getting older chronologically, but they don't want to give up all the things they love doing.
Right.
And then it's like a second wind almost to be able to
That's right.
recover faster.
Wow.
And mitochondrial function is huge. We've had a small study where they're looking at, and you'll appreciate this. I think it was a electrocardiogram as an
Hmm.
indicator of mitochondrial function. So
Yeah.
how zippy the heart is reflects it.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting, showing higher energy levels, and it's very possible the mitochondria also draws on the water around it
Hmm.
for its function.
Yeah, well, I mean, the mitochondria utilizes proteins. I don't know if we're talking about this partition against cell membranes. Now, the organelle, the mitochondria, has its own cell membranes. Do you know if this is
Yeah,
actually working in the mitochondria as well as in the cytosol? You're right, the
it,
regular portion of the cell.
it should, because of the way it transfers throughout the water.
Hmm.
So there's no reason to think it wouldn't. It's just that it's not studied.
Yeah.
But that energy feeling that people experience, and we have, kind of endless examples of that. But you mentioned that, an athlete in their 60s or 70s or something to feel better and perform better than, they have in a long time.
That's right. No,
That
it's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, really, just, our passion here is to live young for a lifetime, right? And
yeah,
it's kind of like, how do you make 100 to the new 30? I was talking with with Mukti, who's the woman that I'm living with, and we were having a sort of a philosophical conversation about this related to kind of meditation and enlightenment and things like that. And the net effect of that was I want to have a 300-year-old mind in a 30-year-old body, right?
Ooh.
Right, with all the wisdom, all the insight, all the enlightenment, all the perspective, and yet be in a 30-year-old body to be able to go out and do whatever you want to do physically, right? So I think that's kind of a key thing. So I'm really kind of liking that comment about having a 300-year-old mind in a 30-year-old body. But I think if we can do things that help protect the body so that it can be 30 years old, right?
mhm.
That's kind of the ticket. So I'm loving this. So you were talking also about some people. I think a research trial, maybe it was a preliminary trial. About mental fatigue or brain training, some things like that, and NanoVi's impact on some of that. You want to talk to us a little bit about that? I found that really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. NanoVi's been used for quite a while for the mental aspects of it, especially some pro athletes,
Hmm.
baseball pitchers, people like that, and often using it for sleep because it balances the autonomic nervous system, which has also been studied.
Okay.
But in this case, this is mental performance in terms of endurance
Mm.
and focus, concentration, and that's being studied now. Initially, the Neurofeedback Center, 40 Years of Zen, um, could measure that very easily in all the people they were training and added NanoVi to their protocol.
Hmm.
And now
So
it's
just so the audience understands, this is Dave Asprey's 40 Years of Zen. Uh, and I happen to know the guy that actually was the lead guy that got all their neurofeedback stuff set up. He no longer works with them.
Drew.
Um, yeah, true,
Yeah,
exactly. And and I've done neurofeedback with Drew actually, and met with him in California and done a bunch of things remotely as well. But um, it's interesting that when you do these sessions, because he was driving me through these sessions and even a little bit beyond what they were doing at 40 Years of Zen, how fatigued your brain will get, right? And I
uh,
found drinking hydrogen brought me back, but I think if I'd had the NanoV with the hydrogen, that might have been even better. So,
I would love that. I found the same thing, and I didn't have hydrogen. But the way Drew found out about it was the customers, repeat customers that were high performers,
hmm.
brought their nanovies with them, and they were looking at the kind of the difference. And that's
Okay,
when Drew adopted it because it was really easy to see that they could train way higher if
right.
they just did them
Wow.
at the same time.
Yep.
And then on the other end of this, we haven't.
So let's just break that down for a second because this is such a key point. So let's say you have a high functioning person that's, I don't know, they're creating something. Using the NanoV would enable their brain to continue to stay sharp and give them greater endurance, right? The other thing is if they find themselves in a place where they can't use the NanoV, right? They're mountain climbing, they're doing something like that, or they're giving a talk or whatever. They're on for several hours. They can recover using the NanoV. That's kind of what we're saying, I think.
Yes, and also athletes will use it before, like especially somebody like mixed martial arts, where they're really anxious
Okay.
and jittery. They'll use
Yeah.
it to get that calm focus, and then they can kind of,
Mhm.
get into that flow state
Right.
for sports. And then I know that I think generally keeping, repairing oxidative damage, especially in the brain, is a helpful thing. And that's
Hmm.
where a QEEG can show before and after a 15-minute session. It's really
Hmm.
profound if somebody's brain has been stressed, if it's been taxed.
So there are people also that sort of struggle to stay calm and meditate, and then, there are some devices that can be helpful there, right? Steve, I think you're still using one. We did a podcast on the
Focus calm.
Focus Calm, yeah, Focus
Yeah.
Calm, and we did another one with on Brain Tap actually, which is another really interesting device. I've got both those devices. It would be interesting to do the NanoV in
Ooh.
conjunction with that, right?
Yeah.
And see if you can really push yourself into even a deeper meditative state, right? Drink some hydrogen, do the NanoV, go into that state, and see what the impact might be.
Yeah.
Uh,
I've got Patrick Porter from BrainTap. I've got his measurement device right here beside me.
yeah, yeah,
And the plan was to switch devices and for them to test it out. And
yeah.
every time I see Patrick, we think, okay, we've got to get that going. And we haven't done it yet, but it's
Okay,
used a huge amount in conjunction with BrainTap. And it's
cool.
that's our experience with it is that they're a great combination.
Right. We have it in the office where we're using, Patrick and I were together this past weekend, both speaking at a conference, and we have their measurement device in the office. So we do it for every client to give them sort of a brain age and get an idea kind of where they're at. Um, and it would be interesting to just use it in the office, do the NanoV and remeasure it and see, over X number of people, kind of what the average impact might be. That'd
Yeah.
be kind of interesting.
Yeah, and that's where I'm not a person to do the study designs myself.
Mhm. Yeah,
Because there's so many factors, especially that come into something like heart rate variability, which
right.
is why almost everything we've done is before and after. It's really immediate so that no other factors could come into play.
Sure. Sure. No, that makes sense. And with regards to heart rate variability, which is really a look at the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system tone, having lower sympathetic nervous system tones equated to many health benefits and longer life. I assume that the NanoVi is actually raising heart rate variability, which means that it's increasing parasympathetic nervous system tone. Is that kind of what you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been studied, and a continuous monitor will show that about minute 7 or 8, people come out of stress mode, and then
Okay.
it's maybe 13, 14, or 15 minutes before they really see the parasympathetic grow.
Okay.
But it will take people out of stress mode really pretty quickly, and that's
Interesting.
one of the reasons athletes, if they could just use it, before a match or something,
Hmm.
then it'll help them be really clear and focused and calm.
I can imagine a golf pro putting it in a golf cart, and that way, before they get up to make that big putt, they could be breathing the NanoVi in, right, just to calm them down as they're going up the fairway.
I like it. I like it. Yeah. I don't know. By the time they're pro, they might not need it.
They
They've
might
got
not
that
need
one
it, but
figured out.
I'm not sure those guys ever outgrow stress exactly, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an interesting point. There's a certain level and type of stress that's really productive.
hmm.
And so, and I don't think that there's any way NanoVi is going to interfere with that. But
Yeah,
that agitated, jittery, part of it, that's the part you want to get rid of.
yeah. So, just so people understand, so you have this device, you turn it on, it goes through a little calibration for, I don't know, 30 seconds or something like that. It feels like 45 seconds maybe. And then you're good to go. But you can pick the time with which you're going to inhale the vapor, if you will. And what's the you can dial that up and down. So typically it comes off at 15 minutes. Is there an advantage to going longer, shorter? Walk us through that a little bit.
Oh, definitely going longer for people that are active or ill or just older people because they've got more damage to repair. And more than one session a day is also a great idea. So a lot of people own their own devices. And if you've got one, like I have one beside my desk here, then
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to use it way more than 15 minutes.
Yeah. How much
And
do you use it a day?
well, I meditate in the morning, which is only 20 minutes in the morning. And then again, always in the evening for um, at least, that, probably half an hour. And then during the day, I'll just grab it and put it on, when I think about it. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
probably using it at, an hour and a half to 2 hours a day.
Oh,
Wow.
Not
wow.
every day if I'm out somewhere, but I have it right beside me and I spend a lot of time at my desk. So it all depends. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it also, there's 3 different power levels of devices. And so it depends on which device you're using. Yours is the most powerful one, and
Okay.
mine's the most powerful one.
Okay. So
And
just walk us through that. So what are the different levels, and then what's the benefit from one over the other? Is it just with a more powerful one you get the same benefit in a shorter time frame, or you actually get benefits that you don't access otherwise, or what's
or you,
happening?
yeah, or you get twice as much benefit in the same amount of time, which
Okay.
is why
Sure.
so many people go for the biggest device. But if
Right.
it were 15 minutes as a base, the next device down is only half as powerful, so it would be a half hour ish.
I see.
And the least powerful one is a full hour, which is we've discovered is not it's not just a matter of time at that point. It's
Mhm.
the smallest device is going to work for almost everyone, but we have had people that it wasn't enough to get them up and running, and they really had to have a more powerful device because one of them was a crush victim,
Mhm.
and there's just too much going on, and she could not get the same effect by using the smaller device longer.
Mhm. Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
what I'm kind of hearing here is that you could slot this in for almost anything related to health, related to psychological stress, related to work on or working against factors that are driving the aging process. It sounds like you could, no matter what somebody's coming in for, so to speak, if they're trying to regenerate a knee or they're working on their brain or TBI or
Yeah.
cardiovascular disease or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fascinating. You're kind of coming at this again, as we talked early on, kind of from the energetic perspective of the cell, but really kind of the entropy perspective, which is another twist on the energetic perspective,
Yeah.
which is even more sort of foundational than some of the signaling molecules or even the absolute structure. So it's very, very cool. So what's on the horizon for you? What are you guys thinking about now? Are you going to come out with an even more powerful one, or one that you can put in a backpack and walk around with, or what are you going to do?
We're always testing to see if there's a way to amp it up. And so
Okay,
that is an area that's interesting because um, it's more possible. Part of it is like what's even available, right? Because you have to be able to buy the components for it. They have to be
right.
available outside of the military applications to be able to get
Mhm.
them. And so that's an area of interest. And then after that, we're really looking at expanding it, especially interested in areas like corporate wellness. Why not have a bunch of people using it in one place?
Sure.
Athletics, professional athletics, which we've got some exciting things coming down the pipe on that, but they're still unannounced. And then, and that was another piece that you didn't mention earlier, but performance. Performance is measurable. Um,
Okay. Tell us about that. What are you measuring?
well, people measure, say, any of the metrics like watts on a bicycle or reps, times, any of those pieces of it. People can measure.
So let me get that straight. So let's say somebody is doing watts on a bike. If they use the NanoVi after working out consistently, they're able to push more watts, or if they use it prior to or during, or what are you guys finding there?
Prior is the one we know the most about. It
Okay.
will have, if you just use it every day, it's going to still have benefits, that just are ongoing. But
Mhm.
prior to is where we have better information. And one other study there is really impressive. Again, it's a double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover study of athletes, and they using it prior had 17% less blood lactate after the hour all-out exercise test.
Interesting.
And it's really substantially different.
Yeah.
And that was prior use. And that would be my next, my dream study would be exactly that question you have is, well, how does the timing affect it? So
Yeah.
could they use it? I
Pre.
had a professional hockey player say, if we could use it an hour before and get the same result, that's
Mhm.
what we need to do because we're busy the hour before we go out on the ice.
That's right. Yeah.
And I don't know that information.
That's a
We don't
great
know.
question. What is the duration of effect, do you think? Do you have a feeling for the duration of effect?
Um, I suspect that an hour ahead of time would be that advantage.
Hmm.
Um, everybody's going to be different, but I would think that you would have a similar result. But I don't know about 4 hours before, say,
Right. Got it.
and if you just kind of need a little boost.
Yeah.
And certainly with that calming effect, that clear focus effect, you want to do that fairly close because
Mm.
otherwise you're going to undo you know,
Sure.
your own system there.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Do you think there's any training effect that occurs in the body? In other words, for example, let's say with physical activity, let's say you're playing tennis, you can train your nervous system, right, to be an efficient tennis player. And with meditation, you can train your brain to get into a meditative state faster, easier, and create a sense of calm and, equilibrium, if you will. Do you think there's a training effect of the NanoVi that it actually is helping to facilitate the cells on their own to be able to go into this state? Or do you think, or maybe we don't know about that, but I'm just curious.
Well,
So,
I would be guessing, but I kind of doubt it because I think it's just sort of affecting these building blocks, and the training effect happens at a more sophisticated level of
okay.
interactions and signaling and so on.
Okay. Got
That
it.
would be, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Hard to know. Yeah. Lots of unanswered questions. That being said, if you're listening to this, I think you can see this is kind of a fascinating area to work in, that's been showing some real benefits. And I think most of the benefits are macroscopic in the sense that they're sort of performance based, if you will, either with mental endurance or physical capability or whatever else. So, how would people follow up to learn more about this and that kind of thing? Maybe order one or whatever. What's the story with that?
Well, our website is eng3corp.com, which is eng3corp.com.
Yeah, that's
And
the
we
new
did,
number three, not THREE, right? Three.
yes, the number
Okay.
3. And we did put a page together because we thought your listeners would be more interested in results and evidence and so on.
Sure.
And it has a 3D video on it that shows how the NanoVi works as well. So that's only 3 minutes long, but it's well worth watching. So
Great.
there's more information on that page, and it's eng3corp.com/Gladden.
Okay.
And then also you mentioned the studies are hard to find, and you're right.
Yeah.
For the studies, you really have to log in, and we send them out because we don't make the studies public for compliance reasons.
Okay.
And so, and if you do log into that page, we only send things like study results and valuable information. It's not really a marketing, where we're just telling you, spamming you and so on. And
Right.
so
Right.
all of that information, I think we do send either information about pricing or a link to the shopping cart, I think, or something, so you can learn about the pricing and you could buy them. And then what we do for you, because they're your, people listening to your podcast, is we would offer a free transportation case if they
Okay.
are
Oh, wow.
there, which is great
That's not
because
trivial. Yeah, that's not trivial. The transportation case is actually what it comes in is actually like this hard plastic suitcase that with a lot of foam that protects it. It's almost like think of it as almost like a gun case. I mean, it's actually it's not like a paper bag or just a cloth bag. It's actually, a very well engineered, structured case that this thing comes in. So, yeah.
Yeah, it'll go in the hold of an aircraft, and we've never had one damaged in that case.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
it's, if you're going to go somewhere with the device, it's great to have it. It also goes as a carry-on. So
And do they need to put a code in when they order it or anything like that?
no, that's fine. That's fine. We just and just as long as we know, and if they did just jump in the shopping cart and buy one, don't buy the case.
Okay, don't buy the case.
No,
All right.
we'll refund the money if they did, but
Yeah.
it's
But
easier not to.
how would they identify that they're a listener?
Because it'll come through that page will identify them if they sign in on the /Gladden page.
Okay.
And maybe
Okay.
if you link to that page somewhere.
We'll definitely have a link in the show notes.
Okay.
So it's eng3corp.com/Gladden.
Yeah. And then if they do just phone, people are welcome to just phone and then just mention it. So we pick it up.
Sure. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, thanks for that. Well, Rowena, it's been too long in coming, but I'm really glad we got an opportunity to have this conversation. So
it takes a long time to get a podcast in. I think we've been planning this for about 6 months.
I think so. So really appreciate your persistence and all that. Yeah. Great to chat.
Oh, it's great. It's an honor. Thanks so much.
Our pleasure.